by the time fireworks smoke curled over Vale Manor, everyone needed a villain. And my name, Claire Hart, was convenient. I was still wearing my catering badge, hands smelling like champagne and citron, when Cole Harper's flashlight landed on my face like a verdict. Security screens replayed the same blur. A little white dress, a flash of hair, then nothing. Lily Vale, 6, had vanished in the noise and glitter. Around me, guests whispered, phones raised, as if tragedy was another photo opportunity. I kept thinking of Noah asleep at home, trusting me to come back before midnight, like always. Damon Vale, Mafia boss, stood under the chandelier as if the ceiling itself answered to him. Yet his eyes were wrecked, fixed on footage, and the yard beyond the glass. Men in earpieces ran in tight loops, calling out grids, thermal sweeps, dog teams, camera angles. None of it mattered. The estate was a fortress until a child slipped through its teeth. I watched Damon's hand crush a rocks glass he never drank from. Knuckles pale, jaw locked so hard it looked painful. Power didn't help when your daughter disappeared. And they stared at me, like I had done it. I wasn't family, wasn't a guest, wasn't untouchable. I was the single mom who worked events to keep rent paid and Noah, 7, fed. That made me easy to corner. Cole's team had already questioned half the staff, but when they reached me, their tone sharpened, like they could smell fear and confuse it for guilt. My phone buzzed with a missed call from my sitter, and my stomach flipped. I wanted to run home, lock my door, pretend this mansion wasn't swallowing a child. Instead, I stood there and took the heat because leaving felt like betraying her tonight. The air outside tasted like burnt sugar and gunpowder from the fireworks, and the lawn glittered with paper ash that stuck to my shoes. Helicopter rotors thumped overhead, chopping the night into frantic pieces. Inside the security room, monitors showed every angle of the gardens, the fountain, the service corridor, the ballroom doors. It should have been impossible to vanish here. I kept replaying Lily's small face from earlier, the way she clutched her father's sleeve when strangers leaned in too close. Kids know when a room is dangerous, even when adults are smiling. My chest hurt with that thought. Cole Harper kept moving, a shadow with a clipboard and the patience of someone paid to mistrust everyone. I could feel his skepticism like a hand on my neck as he checked lists, rewound footage, asked for timestamps, asked again. Damon's gaze slid over me once, cold and sharp, and I hated how it pinned me in place. Not because he raised his voice, but because he didn't. He looked like a man who could buy any answer. Yet here he was, trapped by a question no money could solve. Where did Lily go when the sky lit up tonight? I kept picturing Noah's room, the dinosaur nightlight, the way he always asked if my job was safe before he fell asleep. He'd learned the math of being poor early, the way I'd learned it after his father left and the bills didn't. Standing in Vale Manor, surrounded by marble and $1,000,000 flowers, I felt that old shame flare, then burn into anger. A missing child doesn't belong to one class. Fear doesn't check invitations. I wasn't Lily's mother, but I was a mother, and that was enough to make my hands shake and my feet stay planted right there. They told themselves the cameras must have glitched, that the crowd had blocked the view, that the garden lights had thrown off the sensors. I listened to the excuses stack up like sandbags against a flood. A tracking dog had taken Lily's scent to the hedge line and then stopped, circling, confused. The rain that came after the fireworks washed away whatever footprints existed, and every minute felt like a door closing. Cole's people widened the search radius and the word FBI floated through the hallways like a threat and a prayer. In that circle, I stayed the easiest suspect. At one point, I caught my reflection in a window. Hair pinned too tight, mascara smudged from sweat. Mouth set in that stubborn line I used when Noah was sick and I couldn't afford to panic. Damon walked past me, close enough that I smelled smoke on his suit and something clean underneath, like cedar. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did, because it reminded me he was real, not a headline. His control was a wall, and behind it I could sense a father breaking. Cole tried to keep me at arm's length, like distance could keep suspicion tidy. Somewhere down the corridor, a child's toy piano from the gala's auction sat abandoned. One key stuck so it kept tapping the same note. That sound dug into my nerves more than the helicopters. I wanted to tell Cole that blaming me didn't make Lily safer, that suspicion without purpose was panic wearing a uniform. But I also knew how it looked. The help, the single mom, the outsider. I swallowed my pride and watched, collecting details the way you do when you have no power except attention. If Lily's disappearance had a pattern, I needed to see it clearly. Near the front entrance, the iron gates showed up on a monitor like black ribs against the driveway lights. Every few seconds, the intercom hissed with static, interrupted by clipped updates from search teams and the distant chop of rotor blades. Staff clustered in the kitchen, praying over coffee they couldn't drink. Damon paced once, twice, then stopped, as if motion wasted oxygen. I felt myself hovering between worlds, the servants' hallway where I belonged, and the foyer where decisions were made. When Cole's radio crackled, his face tightened, and for the first time he looked uncertain instead of annoyed. I didn't hear the intercom report so much as feel it ripple through the house, changing the temperature. A kid at the gate, small voice, muddy shoes, a German shepherd planted beside him. The detail that landed hardest was the limp, the mention of blood on fur, an animal that should have curled up somewhere warm but hadn't. Cole's skepticism flickered, but Damon snapped to attention like a man given air after drowning. Hope is dangerous when you've been crushed for hours, yet it sparked anyway, and I knew I would follow. He insisted his dog knew where Lily was. I ran toward the front drive the moment the intercom hissed again, my badge swinging against my chest. Floodlights turned the iron gate into a bright cage, and the helicopter beat shook the trees. Behind me, cameras kept looping failure. Ahead, a child waited in the cold, alone, somehow steady. Cole Harper was already there, shoulders squared, talking into his sleeve mic with that clipped patience of men who expect disappointment. Damon Vale stood a few steps back, perfectly still, like movement might waste Lily's remaining time. I felt their eyes on me as I approached, and breathed slow anyway. The boy was smaller than the security monitors had made him seem, but his stance carried an old kind of caution. Mud caked his torn sneakers. A German shepherd pressed close to his leg, ears sharp, one paw lifted wrong. The dog's fur was damp with blood, still utterly proud. I didn't know his name yet, but I recognized the look in his eyes. The one kids get after they learn grown-ups only listen to power. It was the same look Noah wore when landlords knocked. I crouched near the bars, palms open, careful and quiet, so he could breathe. Cole's body language said false tip, time waste, move along. I could almost hear his tally of the night's so-called helpers. The boy didn't beg. He waited. The shepherd watched Damon, then watched me, as if deciding who might be safe enough. Throat tightened and I nodded like a promise. Damon finally stepped closer, and the air seemed to thin around him. He didn't shout, but his presence carried command. Cole tried to intercept, protective of protocol, protective of the boss. I stayed where I was, because the boy's hands were trembling under control, and I knew that trick well. He gave his name in a flat, practiced way, like he'd learned that feelings got used against him. Mason Reed. 8. And the dog beside him called Atlas. I didn't repeat it out loud. I held it in my mind like something fragile and real, because names can be shelter. Cole kept scanning the road, calling for confirmation, hinting at the FBI arriving soon, as if the calendar could frighten the forest into returning a child. Damon's attention kept flicking between Mason's face and Atlas's wound. I watched Damon's restraint like it was its own kind of violence in daylight. My own fear sat in my stomach, hot and sharp. If Lily stayed missing, every rumor would harden, and I would become the staff member who vanished a boss's daughter. Noah would feel that fallout too. I could not let Mason be dismissed the way kids get dismissed every day. Mason reached into his jacket like a kid pulling out a secret he'd guarded with his whole body. I braced myself for another story, another maybe. Instead, he unfolded a clean scrap of cloth and revealed a small silver charm bracelet, cold and smeared with creek mud, glinting under light. I'd seen it earlier on Lily's wrist when she twirled in her dress, proud of the tiny heart charm. A mother's gift, someone had whispered, from before cancer took her. My skin went cold. Damon's face didn't change, but something in his eyes broke open, silent and raw, right then. Cole stepped forward, suddenly careful, like evidence had a gravity he couldn't argue with. Damon didn't touch the bracelet at first. I watched his fingers hover, then close, as if he was afraid the metal would dissolve. Atlas shifted, a whine in his throat that sounded like pain and loyalty. In that moment, the mansion stopped being a stage for people and became a map with one point. Lily had been alive near water. Mason's shoulders loosened a fraction, like he'd been holding his breath for adults to believe him. I felt tears sting, not from sadness but from relief. Damon's gaze cut to me, not accusing now but measuring. He had seen who moved first. I hated that my steadiness might matter more than my words, yet I couldn't deny the shift. Cole signaled for vehicles, but Damon stayed controlled, final in the way storms are final on schedule. Mason didn't celebrate. He stared past the gate toward the tree line, like he could still hear pursuit. His fingers stayed on Atlas's collar, gentle and firm. The dog's injury was cleaned but untreated, and Mason kept glancing down, calculating how much longer Atlas could stand. Comfort didn't teach that. Cole tried to pull Damon back toward protocol, but the bracelet had rewritten the night. The house changed around us, staff listening, guards tightening. I pictured Noah at home and felt my choice harden. I was blamed. I could survive that. I could not survive leaving a child in dark. Damon leaned closer to Mason, and the boy held his ground without flinching. That bravery looked different than Lily's. Less bright, more weathered. Mason's eyes flicked to me, checking whether I would vanish behind the adults. I stayed. Atlas leaned in, steadying him, and I felt my heart answer, yes. Mason motioned toward the woods beyond the property line like someone who'd walked those paths in the dark. He laid out where Atlas found the bracelet near a creek bed. Damon absorbed every detail, and Cole's skepticism shifted into tactics. The search stopped being a circle and became a direction. I kept looking at the bracelet in Damon's hand, the mud clinging to the charm like proof that nature didn't care about wealth. Damon's thumb rubbed the heart once, then stilled. It was the sign his control had a crack. Not weakness. A sharpened edge. A promise forming without words. Mason's voice never rose, but his next detail hit harder than the helicopters. He had seen tracks in wet soil, small prints heading away from the creek. 2 sets. One matched Lily's size. The other was smaller, heartbreakingly tiny, like a toddler. My stomach dropped as the story rearranged itself. Lily hadn't vanished into nothing. She had gone with someone because she chased another child's fear. Noah's face flashed in my mind. Damon's eyes lifted to the woods and Cole's men shifted. The gate shrank behind us. Mason's detail landed like thunder. 2 sets of footprints and one was tiny. The bracelet disappeared into Damon's fist, and the tiny footprint detail hit me like a shove. A second child. A toddler. Cole's men broke formation, suddenly purposeful, and floodlights swung toward the tree line. I should have stepped back into the staff corridor, called my sitter, gone home to Noah. Instead, I felt trapped between suspicion and conscience. If I walked away now, I would carry Lily's missing face forever, and I would teach my son that fear outranks help. So I followed as Damon ordered vehicles to the forest access road, and Cole waved me along, eyes still narrow. We piled into a black SUV that smelled of leather and gun oil, the kind of clean that hides panic. Mason sat beside Atlas in the rear, one hand on the dog's collar, the other tucked tight to his own ribs as if holding himself together. Atlas kept his nose near the cracked window, tasting the air, breathing fast through pain he refused to show. The mansion lights shrank behind us, swallowed by pines, and the helicopter thrum became distant, like a heartbeat fading. Damon rode up front, silent, while Cole unfolded a map over his knee and recalculated everything. At the trailhead, gravel gave way to damp earth, and the forest closed around us the moment we stepped off the path. The air smelled of wet bark and fireworks residue blown miles from the lawn, an ugly reminder that celebration can become cover. Sound changed here. Voices felt rude, and even my breath seemed loud. Cole signaled with his hands, placing men ahead and behind, and Damon moved like he owned shadows, not just buildings. I kept close, boots slipping in mud, thinking of Noah's small socks on my apartment floor and how easy it is to lose someone. Cole finally treated Mason like a witness instead of a nuisance, watching the boy's eyes, his pauses, the way he listened to the creak before moving. Mason described the spot where Atlas pulled the bracelet from brush, and he did it with the precision of someone who has spent nights counting footsteps for safety. Damon absorbed every gesture, every direction, as if he could memorize the terrain into obedience. I noticed how Mason never looked at the sky, only at ground and cover, mapping escape routes by instinct. That was not childhood caution. That was hunted behavior, and skin prickled. I understood why, when Mason's composure cracked at the mention of the tiny prince. He wasn't just helping a man find a daughter. He was chasing his own loss, the kind paperwork creates. Foster care had split him from his little brother Eli, 4, and Mason had been living in the woods to undo that decision with nothing but stubborn love and a wounded dog. It wasn't a plea, more like a fact he carried in his bones. My throat tightened, because I'd fought for Noah in court, and I knew how small you feel in rooms built for adults. Everything inside me clicked into a new, terrible shape. Lily hadn't been snatched by the wind or swallowed by the estate. She had chosen. She would have seen a smaller child running, frightened, and her heart would have done what my heart does when Noah trips on a sidewalk. It would have moved before thinking. The idea didn't blame Lily. It honored her. But it also meant she walked into danger on purpose. Damon's stillness sharpened, He watched Mason like the boy was oxygen, like the woods had finally offered a direction, and every second felt like theft from children. Atlas went first, nose low, moving in tight arcs as if the ground held invisible writing. His limp worsened with each step, but he refused to stop, and Mason kept murmuring steady reassurance I could feel more than hear. Cole's team matched the dog's pace without crowding him, spreading out, scanning for broken brush or disturbed moss. I trailed behind Damon, close enough to sense his restraint. He carried fury like a coat he refused to wear until necessary. The forest was beautiful and insulting, sunlight filtering through needles while ahead 2 children moved through darkness, and skin in my chest sprinted. We reached the creek where the bracelet had been, water rushing over stones like nothing was wrong. The footprints were fainter now, softened by moisture. But Mason pointed out the marks, and I saw them, 2 small paths pressed into mud. Atlas sniffed once, then angled downstream, pulling us toward a ravine that dropped sudden and steep. Cole's map came alive in his hands, roots traced with a fingertip, and I watched his respect for Mason grow. Mason knew a safer descent, a narrow zigzag path, and beyond it an old service road leading toward the abandoned old river cannery. The ravine forced us into single file, boots sliding, hands grabbing roots for balance. I tore my sleeve on briars and barely noticed. Atlas trembled on his bad leg, yet kept moving, and Mason's face tightened with every stumble, like he was carrying both children's safety in his spine. Cole's men checked angles and listened for any sound that didn't belong to birds or water. Damon stayed quiet, but his attention widened, scanning not just for Lily, but for whoever might have pushed her this way. The deeper we went, the more it felt planned, and that thought scared me. At the bottom, the creek bent hard, and Atlas pulled toward packed dirt that didn't belong to nature. And Service Road, reclaimed by weeds, ran like a scar through the trees. Rust stained the rocks nearby, and the air carried a metallic smell that reminded me of canned soup in cafeterias. Mason moved faster here, as if recognition gave him strength, and Cole noted tire ruts pressed into the mud, too wide for bikes, too recent for ghosts. Damon's shoulders tightened. I felt a warning in the silence, the kind that comes before you see what you cannot unsee again. Through a break in the trees, I saw an industrial shell, low roofs and broken windows by the river, like a mouth left open. The old river cannery was closer than I wanted. Atlas's ears pricked and his throat rumbled. Not at us, but at what waited ahead. Cole's team tightened their spacing, and Damon's hand flexed once, then went still, the way a man forces control when panic would be easier. I kept walking because Lily's bracelet was cold in my mind and Eli's tiny prints were real. This was not a child getting lost. This was a destination. The old river cannery rose out of the trees like a rusted ship run aground, its corrugated walls buckled, windows punched out, river mist clinging to the steel. The closer we got, the more the forest seemed to hold its breath, as if birds had decided this place didn't deserve their noise. My boots sank into black mud streaked with orange flakes of metal, and the air turned sour with mold and old brine. Damon's men slowed automatically. Even Damon did, because the building felt wrong, like a mouth waiting to swallow anything small enough to fit between its teeth. Cole Harper lifted a hand, and the team spread in silence, boots stepping where weeds hid broken glass. He pointed 2 men wide to the loading dock, another to the collapsed office wing, and kept Damon beside him with a look that said, "Control yourself." I stayed behind them, throat tight, because I could feel Damon's impatience vibrating under his calm. Atlas limped ahead with Mason's fingers in his fur, nose working, ears pinned forward. When Atlas gave a low warning rumble, my scalp prickled and my heart ran as if it wanted to reach Lily before legs could follow. Up close, the cannery wasn't just abandoned, it was recently used. A wrapper from a gas station sandwich clung to a puddle like a flag. A circle of crushed cardboard marked where someone had slept off the cold. The smell of stale food mixed with damp concrete, and I caught a whiff of cheap cologne that didn't belong to the woods. Fresh shoe prints crossed older ones, heading inside, then back out, then inside again, like pacing. I thought of Noah's bedtime routine and felt sick that children's footprints could end here without anyone noticing until it was too late. Cole signaled for a slow approach to the main door, and every part of me expected a cry, a sob, something that would justify the fear flooding my ribs. Instead, a child's laugh floated out through a broken window, light and bright, like a bubble rising in dirty water. My breath snagged. That laugh meant Lily was alive, but it also meant she was doing what kids do when terror is too big, turning it into a game. Damon froze, and the stillness around him felt dangerous, like a blade held perfectly flat as eyes hunted the sound in dark. We slipped through the doorway one by one. Inside, the cannery was a maze of rusted conveyors and gutted vats, shadows stacked on shadows. Dust hung in the air, turning the sunbeams into pale columns that looked almost holy, which only made the place feel more wrong. My shoes scuffed across gritty concrete and the sound echoed too far. Somewhere deeper, the laugh softened into a murmur, the rhythm of a story being shaped on the spot. Atlas pulled forward, and Mason followed, small shoulders squared like a soldier's. I kept hands open, praying I wouldn't have to use them. Cole's men moved with trained quiet, checking corners, watching catwalks above, reading the dust like it was handwriting. Near a broken desk, I saw a plastic cup and a smear of peanut butter on a lid, too fresh to be years old. Child-sized scuffs marked the floor where someone had dragged a heel in circles. Atlas sniffed hard, then gave another low warning, and I felt my pulse jump into my throat. Damon shifted his weight forward, a father's instinct fighting a predator's patience. Cole's hand lifted again, holding him back, because rushing could turn rescue into tragedy in seconds. We rounded a row of overturned bins into an open processing bay, and my world narrowed. Lily sat on a clean patch of concrete as if she had claimed it, dress torn and dirty, hair wild, face intent. A much smaller boy leaned against her side, thumb in his mouth, eyes wide but not empty. Lily's hands moved as she spoke, painting pictures in the air, and I understood she was building a safe room out of words. The boy, Eli, watched her like she was a lighthouse. That laugh I'd heard was her armor against the dark pressing in. Mason's breath left him in one broken exhale, and he surged forward until Cole caught his shoulder, then released him when Eli's head snapped up in recognition. Eli scrambled toward Mason, and Mason dropped to his knees, wrapping the little boy into himself like he was reattaching a piece of his own body. At the same time, Lily looked up and saw Damon. Her face shifted from brave to small in a heartbeat. Damon crossed the distance without thought, and when Lily hit his chest, his composure finally cracked, silently and completely. I swallowed a sob I didn't earn yet. For a few seconds, the cannery stopped being a threat and became a cradle, held together by desperate love. I saw Damon's hands tremble as he checked Lily's arms, her hair, her breathing, like touch could confirm reality. Mason rocked Eli gently, forehead pressed to the boy's temple, letting relief shake through him. Atlas stood guard beside them, legs stiff, tail barely moving, eyes sweeping the shadows as if he knew danger never announced itself. Cole's men fanned out, quick and quiet, clearing corners and counting exits. I stood, rooted, thinking of Noah, and thanking force I didn't believe in. Lily's brave mask slipped in flashes, and in those flashes I caught shards of what she'd lived through. She had seen two men near the river road, voices low, hands impatient. She'd heard money discussed like it was ordinary. Words like delivery and buyers floated through her memory, and my stomach turned to ice. Eli's fear made sense now. He wasn't just lost, he was hiding. Damon listened without interrupting, jaw clenched, eyes empty of mercy. The father in him held Lily. The man in him marked targets. Cole's face hardened, because protocol had just become war right here, tonight. Cole's team finished their sweep and signaled the building was clear for the moment, but the word moment mattered. Atlas stayed between the children and the nearest doorway, shoulders squared despite his injury. Mason kept one arm around Eli while staring at the shadows like they might grab him again. Damon lifted Lily, cradling her as if his strength could build a wall, and I felt the pull of that certainty even as it scared me. I backed toward the exit with them, certain the cannery would reveal who had sent those men and that this rescue was a pause. Outside, daylight hit the river and made it look innocent, but I could still taste rust on my tongue. Damon carried Lily toward the trees with Cole close, and Mason holding Eli like a lifeline. Atlas limped after us, head high, refusing to collapse until everyone else was moving. I glanced back at the cannery's broken windows and ruts in mud, and understood why. Lily hadn't wandered. Eli hadn't wandered. They had been funneled here by adults who spoke in money words, by men who saw children as cargo. We weren't ending a search. We were stepping into a hunt. The walk out of the cannery felt like waking up inside someone else's nightmare. Lily was pressed against Damon's chest, small arms locked around his neck as if letting go would make the building pull her back. Eli stayed glued to Mason, his face buried, his whole body shaking in tiny aftershocks. Atlas limped behind them, stubborn and upright, like the last guard at a door that should never have existed. My own legs finally caught up to the fear. The adrenaline that kept me moving through rust and shadow started to drain, leaving my hands buzzing and my throat tight. I kept swallowing, trying to push down the image of Lily laughing in the dark to keep a toddler calm. That kind of bravery doesn't belong to a 6-year-old. It belongs to someone who has already learned that adults can fail you. Outside, the river looked peaceful, and that made me angry. Sunlight slid over the water like nothing had happened. The trees swayed like they had not just hidden a building where children huddled and waited. I looked at my shoes, at the grit stuck to the soles, and I realized my earlier humiliation at Vale Manor was nothing compared to what this place meant. Being blamed felt personal. This felt evil. As we moved toward the service road, Lily's memories came in broken pieces, the way a child tries to report a storm. She remembered the smell of men who weren't from the woods. She remembered hands, heavy boots, and the sound of money being discussed the way adults talk about groceries. Words like delivery and buyers didn't belong in a child's mouth, but she had heard them anyway, and now they sat in my head like ice. She didn't understand the meaning, only the tone. Impatient, transactional, certain. I watched Damon's face while she clung to him. His expression stayed controlled, but his eyes had changed. The relief was real, but it had hardened into something sharper, like a blade that knew exactly where it wanted to go. He kept smoothing Lily's hair with one steady hand, while the other held her as if he could physically block the world. The father in him was trembling under the surface. The man in him was already calculating consequences. Mason moved fast, scanning the trees as if expecting someone to step out and claim Eli back like property. That thought landed hard, because it matched the language Lily had picked up. Buyers, delivery, those were not words for lost children. Those were words for a pipeline. And suddenly I understood why Mason looked older than 8. He had been running from something organized, something patient, something that didn't panic the way we did. My mind kept jumping to Noah, safe in a warm apartment, probably half asleep on the couch waiting for me to come home. I pictured his small face when he asks if everything is okay, the way he tries to be brave so I won't worry. If Noah had gone missing, I would have begged the whole city for help. Lily had a father with power, and even he had been helpless until a boy and a wounded dog walked up to an iron gate. That contrast made me sick. Cole's team didn't relax. They treated the forest like it still had eyes, and I could feel why. This wasn't a random stumble into the wrong place. The cannery wasn't just abandoned, it was used. Even in my brief, terrified scanning inside, I had noticed the signs. Food wrappers that weren't old enough to turn to dust, a makeshift sleeping spot, scuffs and smears that didn't belong to wildlife. There were marks on the floor where something had been dragged and shifted, not heavy machinery, but human things. Small human things. When we reached the edge of the trees, Damon made a decision that tightened the air. He didn't let anyone call for loud help. No flashing lights, no rushing uniforms, no public announcement that the children had been found. I could feel Cole's agreement in the way he redirected his men, pushing for quiet containment and controlled movement. I also felt my own fear flare, because choosing silence can look like hiding, and hiding is the language of Damon's world. But then I looked at Lily's bruised exhaustion, at Eli's wide, wary eyes, and I understood the logic even if it scared me. If the men Lily described were real, noise would warn them. And if those men were connected to people who wore badges and smiled in offices, then the wrong call could hand these children right back to the danger we had just pulled them from. I hated that thought. I hated that it felt plausible. I hated that Damon's resources suddenly seemed like the only shield that didn't leak. Atlas stumbled once and caught himself, refusing to drop. Mason's fingers tightened in his fur, and I felt my chest ache at the bond between them. That dog had stayed on his feet for children, while a system designed for children had split brothers apart. My earlier worry about my job and reputation felt almost childish now. I had been terrified of losing a paycheck. These kids had been terrified of losing each other. Back near the cannery door, Cole's men moved through again, faster this time. Not searching for bodies but for proof. They photographed what they could, bagged what looked fresh, marked paths in and out. The cannery was a stop, not a home, and that detail mattered. It meant someone had planned it. It meant someone expected children to be there long enough to need food, comfort, and silence. It meant someone might come back. When Cole returned, his face looked carved from stone. He carried the kind of quiet urgency that doesn't come from one bad night, but from recognizing a pattern. In his hands were signs that made my stomach drop further. Scraps of paper with numbers, coded shorthand that didn't match any inventory system, and a back office drawer that hadn't been empty. There were folders, names, dates, more than one child. And the way Cole held them told me the worst part wasn't just what we'd found, But who would show up for it when they realized it was missing? Relief barely had time to warm my ribs before Cole's men flowed back into the cannery like shadows returning to a crime scene. Damon kept Lily pressed to him outside the doorway, but his eyes stayed on us, hard and watching, as if the building might spit out more truth. Mason held Eli against his shoulder, rocking without stopping, while Atlas stood braced on 3 good legs, refusing to lie down. I followed Cole inside because my earlier blame still clung to me, and because evidence felt like the only shield left. Every step echoed, and my heart counting seconds. The place looked abandoned from the road, but up close it was organized in small, sick ways. A stack of canned peaches sat in a corner, labels facing out. Blankets were folded, not tossed. Someone had taped a strip of masking tape to a beam and written a date in black marker. Near a rusted conveyor, I saw a child's plastic cup rinsed clean, set beside a bottle of water like routine. Cole's flashlight skimmed over shoe prints that overlapped. Adult sizes circling, smaller ones contained inside like pens. It wasn't shelter, it was staging, and my skin agreed instantly. One of Cole's men knelt by a filing cabinet that should have been empty and yanked the bottom drawer. It stuck, then gave with a metallic cough, revealing a cheap spiral notebook and a locked metal cash box wedged behind it. The notebook pages were filled with blocky handwriting and short codes, the kind you use when you don't want a sentence traced back to you. Cole didn't celebrate. He moved faster, photographing each page with a work phone, then nodding for bolt cutters. My mouth went dry as the lock snapped. Inside, edges and plastic sleeves gleamed under dust. The box held folders, each one thin, each one labeled like a school file, except the categories made my stomach flip. First names only, ages, hair color, notes about temperament written in a cold, buyer-friendly tone, a line called placement status, another called transfer window. Some pages had prices replaced by initials and numbers, as if money could be disguised by shorthand. I counted at least 8 children, all under 8, and I had to look away before my hands started shaking too hard. This was paperwork for disappearing people, not losing them. In that moment, the cannery felt alive. I thought of the way staff had stared at me earlier, the way blame had landed because I wore an apron instead of a suit. That humiliation shrank now, crushed beneath the weight of these neat little profiles. Someone had reduced children to checkboxes and schedules, turning fear into logistics. My chest burned with a rage I saved for bills and bosses. But this was different. This was predatory, bureaucratic, and confident. I pictured Noah's name typed on a sheet like this, and my vision blurred. My hands wanted to rip everything apart, but Cole needed it intact to survive. In the scramble, I ended up holding one folder while Cole photographed another, my fingers careful at the edges like it might burn. The moment was brief, practical, and then a flashlight beam pinned my hands. One of the security men stiffened, eyes narrowing, and his posture shifted from teamwork to accusation. I felt it before I understood it. I was not wearing their earpiece, not carrying their weapon, not part of their circle. To him, I looked like someone pocketing evidence. The old scapegoat pain reopened so fast it tasted like metal. I tried to breathe, and couldn't yet. He stepped closer, palm half raised as if to stop me, as if I might run. Cole's head snapped up, and for a heartbeat the whole room narrowed to my hands and their suspicion. I remembered the ballroom, the whispering guests, the way blame sticks to the staff. Damon's gaze cut toward me from the doorway, and for the smallest beat he didn't move. That pause hurt more than the accusation, because it suggested he could believe it too. My cheeks burned with anger and shame, and I held the folder out like a confession steady open, refusing to flinch. Then Damon moved. Not with theatrics, just certainty, stepping between me and the beam of light like a door closing. He didn't take the folder from my hand as if claiming it. He simply made it clear that my hands were not an enemy. The security man backed off at once, and Cole's shoulders dropped a fraction, recalibrating. Damon's protection landed on me like heavy fabric, warm and suffocating at the same time. I resented how relieved I felt. I also resented myself for noticing that his voice, even unspoken, could end a conflict instantly, and that fact changed everything. Cole returned to the work, hands steady, snapping photos of every page, every label, every coded line. Another man copied the notebook's codes into a secure note app, then sealed the original in a plastic bag. I watched them treat paper like explosives, because that's what it was in this world. Proof could save children, or get people killed. Damon kept Lily outside, but he watched through the doorway, eyes cold, counting exits, counting time. The cannery felt less empty each second, as if the men Lily remembered might step in minute to reclaim what they thought belonged to them. Damon signaled for immediate extraction, and the team obeyed with quiet speed. Mason adjusted Eli on his hip, checking his face over and over, as if sleep might be danger. Atlas tried to follow without help, and one guard finally scooped him with a grunt, careful of the injured leg, while Mason's eyes filled with fierce gratitude he didn't trust himself to show. Lily stayed wrapped around Damon, her small fingers clutching his collar, and he didn't correct her. Cole waved me forward too, and I went, because leaving now would look guilty, and staying meant choosing a side today. We spilled out of the cannery into daylight that felt too normal, then pushed through brush toward the waiting SUVs. The helicopter sound returned, distant but real, and it reminded me that the world still thought Lily was missing. Cole tucked the evidence into a hard case like it was a heart. Damon didn't look back at the building. He moved as if stopping meant death. I climbed in beside the children, and I realized the Vale Estate's clean marble was about to meet reality. Safe rooms, warm soup, and a doctor were next. But safety would be borrowed time. The estate gate swallowed us like a closing jaw, and for a second I expected the forest to spill right in behind the SUVs. Floodlights washed the driveway in sterile white, catching mud on Mason's knees, river grit on my cuffs, and the faint dark drops Atlas left on the stone. Damon carried Lily without slowing, his suit ruined, his posture still commanding. I walked beside them, feeling the weight of the hard case of evidence in Cole's hands as if it were ticking. Somewhere far off, the helicopter kept circling, unaware we were already home. My lungs burned quietly. Staff gathered near the entry the way families gather around an ambulance, faces tight with relief and questions. Mrs. Whitaker pushed through first, a small woman with silver hair pinned back and hands that had soothed generations of scraped knees. She didn't stare at the blood on Atlas's leg, or the tears on Lily's cheek. She simply moved, already turning the chaos into steps. Towels, warm water, rooms prepared. Her calm landed on me like a blanket. I realized I'd been bracing for judgment so long that kindness felt suspicious, even when it arrived holding a tray for us all. She led us to the east wing, where 2 guest rooms connected by a shared bath waited with lamps already lit. The hallway smelled of lemon polish, and something simmering downstairs. Lily stayed glued to Damon, her fingers knotted in his collar, and he let her, carrying her as if gravity had changed. Eli's eyes flicked to every doorway, every mirror, every corner, memorizing escape routes. Mason refused to sit all the way on the mattress, hovering at the edge like comfort was a trick. I helped where I could, placing shoes aside, keeping my voice low inside my head. Mrs. Whitaker returned with soup that steamed in bowls and bread wrapped in a towel to keep it warm. The smell alone made my stomach realize it had been clenched since the fireworks. She set the tray down without asking permission, as if nourishment was law. Lily took sips while watching Damon's face for permission to breathe. Eli ate with quick, silent focus, then tucked close to Mason again, still scanning. Mason kept one hand on Atlas's collar even indoors, like the dog might vanish if he loosened his grip. I watched these habits and knew trauma speaks through posture. Between trips for towels, my mind kept darting to Noah. I pictured him at my neighbor's apartment, probably pretending he wasn't worried, probably counting the minutes like I used to. I hadn't even called yet. Shame prickled, then faded under the bigger truth. Tonight proved how fast a child can disappear even inside gates. Damon's house looked invincible, but it hadn't protected Lily. That fact softened something in me toward him, and I hated that softness because it made me careless. I forced myself back to tasks, rinse the mud, steady the kids, breathe in time with them until morning. Atlas finally tried to lie down and couldn't decide which side hurt less. His chest worked too hard, and the stubborn brightness in his eyes dimmed. Mason's whole body went rigid. Panic held behind his ribs like a trapped animal. I knelt beside them, not touching it first, letting him see my hands were empty. Then I slid a folded towel under Atlas's head and pressed another gently against the bandage to keep it clean. Mrs. Whitaker appeared, calm as sunrise. Downstairs, a phone call pulled a veterinarian out of bed. Mason watched me, then nodded once, barely trusting it. The vet arrived with the quiet speed of someone used to Damon's crises. He carried a medical bag that looked like it belonged in a clinic, not a hallway lined with art. Atlas tried to lift his head and failed, and I felt my throat tighten at the loyalty in that effort. The vet checked temperature, examined the wound, and murmured about infection and rest, all in a tone that refused to dramatize. Mason hovered close, jaw locked, ready to fight anyone who hurt Atlas even by accident. I steadied Mason's shoulder, then released. Remembering touch can sting for him. While the vet worked, Mrs. Whitaker swapped linens and opened a window just enough to let night air cool the room. Steam from soup lingered, mixing with antiseptic, an odd blend of home and battlefield. Lily finally loosened her grip and sank into pillows, but her eyes never left Damon. Eli fell asleep in fits, jerking awake whenever a door clicked. Mason kept his gaze on the vet's hands, tracking every motion like he needed proof the world could be gentle. I washed mud from my palms and watched water swirl away, knowing luxury never erases fear not for us. Damon didn't hesitate. A decision settled over the wing, heavy and final. Cole started sending quiet instructions, and I felt the entire estate shift from rescue to protection. Grace Nolan was no longer a name. She was a lifeline. The idea of bringing a whistleblower here made my stomach flip, because it meant painting a target on every room. Damon's kind of safety is built like a fortress, but fortresses invite sieges. I watched Lily sleep against his chest and understood our next move would either save strangers we hadn't met yet, or pull danger straight to the front door. In the hallway, Cole transferred the hard case to Damon, and Damon gripped it like it could bite. Orders moved through the house without volume. Guards doubled, cameras checked, routes sealed. Mrs. Whitaker worked in the middle of it, setting water within reach, folding blankets, turning the guest wing into something kinder than the woods. Her hands never shook. Mason watched her like he didn't believe care could be real. I almost believed it too, until Eli startled at a faint noise outside and curled tighter in his sleep. Warmth was here, but it sat on top of a trapdoor. Later, when the vet said Atlas would recover with rest and medication, Mason's shoulders sagged like someone had cut invisible strings. In that quiet, he offered the only thing he still owned: a name. He had one adult from the system who had tried to keep him and Eli together, a teacher who asked questions and refused to stop. Grace Nolan. I didn't need to hear a speech to know what that name meant to him. It meant an adult who listened the first time. My chest tightened, because I knew how rare that is. Damon turned, and the air shifted. Damon didn't hesitate. A decision settled over the wing, heavy and final. Cole started sending quiet instructions, and I felt the entire estate shift from rescue to protection. Grace Nolan was no longer a name. She was a lifeline. The idea of bringing a whistleblower here made my stomach flip, because it meant painting a target on every room. Damon's kind of safety is built like a fortress, but fortresses invite sieges. I watched Lily sleep against his chest, and understood our next move would either save strangers we hadn't met yet, or pull danger straight to the front door. Grace Nolan arrived just after dawn, when the estate still smelled like polished wood and reheated fear. 2 of Damon's SUVs rolled up first, then a third that looked older, as if it had been borrowed from a life with parking meters and cheap coffee. Grace stepped out with a canvas tote hugged to her chest. She was younger than I expected, but exhaustion made her posture older. Her shoes were scuffed, her hair pulled back with a fraying elastic, and her eyes kept sweeping the property line like she was counting places to disappear before the people found her. Inside, the marble floors made her hesitate, not from awe but from caution, the way you hesitate on ice. Cole kept his distance like she might be wired, while his men watched her hands. Damon met her in the study without softening his face. A man used to measuring threats by the inch. I stayed near the doorway, pretending I belonged there, feeling my borrowed status in every breath. Grace's tote looked heavier than a laptop should, and I realized it wasn't weight, it was responsibility, carried the way some people carry guilt when the world asking you to quit. She set the tote down and began laying out her life on Damon's desk. Not dramatic, just methodical. A thumb drive, a spiral notebook filled with neat columns, printed timelines in plastic sleeves, and photos of placement forms with names blacked out except the parts that mattered. I watched Damon's eyes track the patterns like a predator smelling blood, dates that matched sudden transfers, social worker initials repeating across counties, an attorney's letterhead appearing too often for coincidence. It mirrored the folders we pulled from the cannery, but wider, like we had found one tooth and she had the jaw. Grace didn't act surprised by our shock. Her fear had been practicing longer than ours. In the margins of her notes, I saw reminders to update backups, to rotate passwords, to leave instructions with someone she trusted. She had created a plan for what happens if she vanishes, not a fantasy of heroism, but an exit strategy that weaponized her absence. Copies sat in multiple places under false labels. A final message was scheduled to release everything if she missed a check-in. Listening to that, I understood she wasn't paranoid. She was realistic, and that truth made the room colder. Damon studied her the way he studies a contract, searching for hidden costs. For a moment, The mansion felt like a courtroom in a cage at once. He could have dismissed her as a liability, because liabilities draw bullets and headlines. Instead, I watched him choose shelter, not softness. Cole's stance shifted from containment to escort. Mrs. Whitaker appeared silently with water, treating Grace like a guest, not a trespasser. Damon's control didn't loosen, but it redirected. He was already turning her receipts into strategy, and I felt a strange gratitude that scared me because his protection comes with shadows. Grace's priorities were clear in the way she held herself. Before any talk of courts or networks, she needed eyes on the boys. I led her upstairs, past quiet guards and closed doors, into the connected guest rooms that smelled of soup and clean cotton. Mason rose instantly, not stepping forward, not stepping back. His body braced for disappointment. Eli woke and pressed into him, peeking out like a fawn. Grace sank to their level without fanfare, and Mason's face cracked in a way that made my chest ache. He didn't have to explain. Being seen was the proof alone. From the doorway, I saw Damon watching, the hard lines of him softened by something close to respect. He was the kind of man people fear in daylight, yet here he was letting a tired teacher rewrite the rules of his house. I caught myself noticing that shift, and irritation flared, because attraction in a moment like this felt like betrayal to my own instincts. Still, when Damon nodded once, granting safety without making anyone beg, it felt stabilizing. Like he understood that power means nothing if it can't protect the smallest person in the room when eyes are watching. Grace returned to the study with us, and her evidence spread across the table like a map of rot. She had tracked patterns of children moved twice in a week, reports closed too fast, and the same caseworkers appearing whenever a kid vanished. The cannery files were the brutal snapshot. Her receipts were the timeline. She tapped a name that matched one folder, then another that led toward a judge's office. I didn't need speeches to feel it. People in clean buildings had been signing off. My stomach turned, yet it finally made sense, and that clarity scared me more. Damon's decision came in a quiet chain of actions. A guest room assigned, security repositioned, phones collected, the study doors locked. Grace didn't relax, but her shoulders lowered a fraction, like she had been holding her breath for months. Cole treated her dead man plan as an asset, not an insult, and I could tell he respected her for thinking ahead. I wished the world didn't require that kind of planning, but wishing had never saved anyone. Damon's protection felt like a roof in a storm. It could save us, or summon the owners, and I felt the clock start again. We were still processing the evidence when Cole returned with the expression that always means time has run out. The air tightened. His surveillance team was back on the cannery, and the feed now showed headlights sliding through the trees, more than one vehicle. Men stepping out, scanning, waiting, acting like they owned the place. I felt my stomach drop, because we had left behind emptiness and taken their paperwork. Damon's posture changed, the softness gone, the calculation back. Shelter became strategy. The cannery was live again, and they were about to learn we had been there right now. Together. Cole's update hit the house like a snapped wire. On the wall of monitors, the old river cannery filled with headlights again, pale beams sliding between trees. The estate, which had smelled like soup and clean sheets, turned into a quiet machine, and I felt it in my ribs immediately. Damon didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Men moved through corridors with tablets and earpieces, doors closing softly, footsteps measured. Cole pointed at timestamps and camera angles, and I understood the cannery was no longer a rescue site. It was bait, and we were choosing it today. I kept waiting for rage, for the reckless charge I'd seen in movies, the kind that gets people killed and lets monsters slip away. Instead, Damon's focus narrowed into something colder and more precise. He wanted faces, plates, routines, and the person who would come to collect, not the drivers. Grace's receipts lay across the desk beside the cannery files, a bridge between two worlds. Names, dates, and categories stared up at me, and I kept seeing the kids attached to them like tags. Lily asleep upstairs. Eli curled against Mason, Atlas breathing. If we failed, those lists would grow. Cole's plan was simple enough for my brain to hold. Watch, record, wait, and let the men reveal their next move. No sirens, no grand confrontation, no drama that would send them scattering into the dark with children as leverage. Damon insisted the first win had to be information alone. I watched Damon listen to Cole, and it unsettled me how calm he became. Earlier I'd seen him crack for Lily, a father pulled into daylight. Now he returned to shadow work, thoughts in straight lines. That control should have frightened me. Instead it steadied me, like a hand a ledge. Still, fear kept snaring me. I knew what Damon could do when rules failed the innocent, and I worried his solutions would leave stains I couldn't wash off. I told myself we were gathering proof, not making harm. I repeated it like Noah's prayers because repetition is how mothers survive. On the monitors, men paced inside the cannery, circling the spot where we found the lockbox. A flashlight swept the floor, searching. Cole captured still frames and built a catalog. I tried not to imagine their step when they learned the children were gone, but my mind went there anyway. Damon turned the study into a map room. A county layout sat open beside a sketch of cannery roads and blind turns. He pointed, paused, and let Cole fill the gaps, trusting competence over comfort. One corner of the table stayed clear, leaving space for Grace's paperwork and my conscience. Grace hovered near the evidence, hands folded, eyes sharp. I felt fatigue under her discipline, the way teachers keep showing up when no one listens. She measured Damon's protection like I did. When he assigned her a room and guard without asking, she accepted, but her gaze said exits. I should have been upstairs, but I couldn't leave. The planning was the hinge between saving Lily and saving kids we'd never meet. I saw the file lists, neat handwriting turning children into cases. Damon's posture repeated the purpose: gather identities, follow patterns, pull the network into light slowly now. A soft thud sounded behind me. I turned and saw Noah in dinosaur pajamas, hair wild from sleep. Mrs. Whitaker hovered with a cardigan, and a guard waited back. My knees went loose. Relief hit, then anger, then uneasy gratitude. Damon had pulled my son into safety without asking quietly. Noah's eyes found mine and softened. I crossed the room, knelt, and pressed my forehead to his hair. Relief tasted like salt. I wanted to ask questions, but I chose one truth: he was here. Damon had made that happen. I hated needing it, and I couldn't deny it. The discomfort had teeth. Protection is never free, and Damon's kind comes with shadows. I worried he was buying my silence with safety, even unintentionally. Then I pictured Noah in a stranger's hands and knew I would have begged for this. I straightened. Gratitude didn't have to equal surrender today. I left Noah with Mrs. Whitaker and went back to the study. Damon's gaze met mine for a beat, acknowledging what he'd done. He didn't look proud. He looked resolved, as if safety was the item on his list. That steadiness unnerved me and helped me breathe at the time. Cole refined the plan with clipped mercy. Cameras stayed distant, eyes without footprints. The goal was patterns: who arrives first, who waits, who calls, who leaves to report. Damon aimed higher than the men inside the cannery. He wanted the handler, the unseen boss. I was hunting a spider too. I stopped hovering and started helping. I offered what I had: the staff roster, contacts, and the blind spots I'd heard people grumble about. Admitting it stung because I'd been listening while they blamed me. Still, guilt can become usefulness, and usefulness can become a shield. I chose over silence. Damon accepted my input like piece of the board. No praise, no pity. It made me feel like a pawn no longer. Fear remained, but shifted into resolve. I kept thinking of names and notes and children upstairs. If we pulled one link daylight, fewer mothers would face beds again. I checked on Lily and Eli. Their sleep looked heavy, earned. Mason stayed awake in a chair, guarding with his eyes. Atlas lay at his feet, finally still. I didn't move anything. I'd learned as a mother that safety comes from sameness, from letting the body stay where it landed. Grace's gaze kept returning to the foster documents, not the cannery. I could read the warning in her stillness. Paper trails trigger searches. Missing children trigger visits. She didn't have to spell it out for me to feel it. A knock from the system could undo everything we'd saved upstairs. Damon absorbed the warning without flinching. The cannery was an outside threat we could watch. The system was an inside threat that could walk in smiling. Cole adjusted the plan in quiet notes, dividing the house into zones. I hated hiding children, but I understood difference between secrecy and safety. On the monitors, the cannery stayed alive with movement. Men paced, made calls, and waited. Cole captured faces and plates, building an archive. Damon insisted on patience, refusing a rush that would scatter them. My pulse hated it, but I understood. Waiting was leverage, and minute gave us another detail. I'd taught Noah to trust rules, but tonight showed me rules can bend around children. Damon's world terrified me because it admits that truth. Still, his plan wasn't chaos. It was proof and exposure, making the pipeline visible enough for people to act. I hated that, and I grateful. Noah being here sharpened everything. I wasn't watching danger from outside. I was inside it with my child nearby. That forced agency. I checked Mrs. Whitaker and ensured she knew route. I asked about backups because losing them would erase the map. I didn't ask Damon for permission. I acted. On the monitors, a second vehicle arrived and parked farther back, cautious. The men didn't rush inside. They waited, scanning trees, checking phones. Cole logged every habit, turning impatience into data. Their waiting meant they expected contact, and contact meant hierarchy. I held my breath for the next arrival now. Damon's phone vibrated once and went still. Guards subtly recentered, the way a room reacts to a storm shift. I knew it from service jobs, when danger walks in before it speaks. Damon checked the clock, then Grace's files, aligning outside movement with inside evidence. His calm meant readiness today. Grace's warning landed like ice. The system would notice Mason and Eli missing and send someone official. If corruption reached that far, the next threat would arrive with credentials, not masks. While the cannery trap tightened outside, a trap formed inside. I watched the gate camera and listened for knock. The estate tried to pretend it was a house again. Mrs. Whitaker lowered her voice. Trays clinked softly, and the hallway lights stayed warm, but every screen in Cole's office kept pulsing with the cannery feed. I could feel that split reality in my chest. Upstairs, children sleeping in borrowed beds. Downstairs, men in dark jackets pacing around rusted machines. Damon moved through it like a man balancing glass. I kept my hands busy folding towels I did not need because stillness made my thoughts scream. Noah's small breathing beside me earlier had anchored me, but now anchor felt slippery. When the doorbell sounded, it was not loud. It was polite, like a visitor arriving for tea. Still, the air tightened. Cole's head lifted first, then Damon's, then mine. I watched Damon choose his public face, the one that could pass for respectable if you did not know the cost. A guard checked the front camera and angled the lens down the drive. A county sedan sat there, clean, ordinary, almost comforting. That was what scared me. Monsters rarely announce themselves with horns. Grace appeared at my shoulder, steady as a chalk line, and Mrs. Whitaker quietly guided Noah away. The official who stepped inside carried concern, the way some people carry perfume, carefully applied. Her smile was small, her eyes alert. She introduced herself with practiced warmth, and I felt my stomach dry out. Damon greeted her with courtly restraint, as if the foyer were a boardroom. Grace stayed near the staircase, ready to intercept anything that drifted upstairs. I stood a half step behind Damon, close enough to be useful, far enough to look like staff. The official's gaze kept sliding past us, mapping doors, hallways, exits. When her attention landed on me, it lingered. She recognized weakness. She asked about Mason and Eli in a tone that sounded gentle. But the questions came too fast, too specific. I could almost see a checklist behind her eyelids. Damon offered simple facts, nothing extra, and kept the conversation on the entry rug as if the marble behind him were private property. Grace spoke in calm, procedural language, guiding the subject toward reports, custody records, and the obvious reality that the boys had been found in danger. The official nodded at the right times. Then her eyes flicked upward, toward the guest wing. Her glance missed Lily and measured boys. My palms went slick. I thought of Noah upstairs, of his tiny backpack by the bed, and I felt a mother's anger flare hot and silent. The official's concern stayed on the surface, but underneath it I sensed appetite, a kind of interest that had nothing to do with welfare. Damon's restraint became the sharpest weapon in the room. He did not posture. He simply allowed the house cameras to keep recording, allowed his attorney to join by speaker, allowed Grace to cite policies with a teacher's steady patience. I held my breath and watched for cracks. Sooner than expected. It started with something small. The official's badge swung when she shifted her weight, and the county seal looked slightly faded, as if copied too many times. Her laminated card held a last name that did not match the name on her business card. I pretended to adjust the vase on the console table while my eyes read every line. Outside, through the beveled glass, I caught the sedan's rear window, reflecting a second vehicle parked farther back. Dark, unmarked. The official never turned to check it. She already knew it was there. Heartbeat slowed and my mind clicked place. I did not speak. I just shifted my stance so Damon could see the cards in my hand, and I let my thumb rest on the mismatched names. Grace caught it too, her gaze narrowing the way it did when a student tried to bluff a homework excuse. Damon's eyes stayed calm, but his attention sharpened, the air around him turning colder without a single threat. He guided the official back toward the foyer table, closer to the camera angle, closer to the attorney's voice, closer to proof. The official's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly, like a seam about to split. Grace kept the language simple and legal, the way you talk when you know someone is listening for an opening. She framed every answer around safety plans, medical notes, and the documented reality of children found abandoned in a dangerous place. Damon never raised the temperature. He offered cooperation, but only through proper channels, only in writing, only with counsel present. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked, and my whole body braced, afraid Eli would wander or Noah would call my name. Mrs. Whitaker's quiet steps smoothed it out. The official's eyes darted again, annoyed by doors she could not open. In my head, I lined up the names. Grace's timeline had a social worker who signed transfers with an alias, a last name that looked harmless until you saw it repeat beside missing children. The official's card carried the same last name, only one letter changed, the kind of adjustment that fools tired clerks. My skin went cold. The dark, unmarked vehicle outside matched a plate number Cole had flagged from cannery footage. Waiting. That meant the knock at our door was not routine. It was a retrieval attempt, dressed as procedure. The system wasn't just compromised. It was mobilized. Damon's next move looked like courtesy. He requested verification through the county office, offered to schedule a meeting, and suggested a written request with numbers. The attorney's presence on speaker made it impossible for the official to keep things casual. Grace asked for the official's supervisor, then calmly repeated the name on the badge as if pinning it to the wall. I watched the official's throat work when she swallowed. Her eyes flicked to the driveway again, toward that car. She started to retreat, smoothing her expression, insisting on urgency while losing ground. Damon held the line, unmoving at last. When the door closed, the house did not relax. It tightened, like proof had crawled under the paint. Cole moved fast to cross-check the plate and the mismatched name. Grace opened her folder to a page marked with the same alias pattern I had just seen in the foyer. Damon looked from that paper to the cannery screens, then up toward the rooms where children slept. My fury stayed quiet, but it sharpened. We had just met danger wearing a polite smile. How many families had trusted that smile and lost everything? Now I understood endgame had to be final. Upstairs, a muffled cough drifted through the vent, and I pictured Eli waking and scanning for exits. I pictured Mason's rigid shoulders in the chair, and Lily's small hand clenched in sleep. I touched the banister and felt how solid the house was, how temporary safety can be. Damon's calm returned, but it carried a new purpose. Corruption was close enough to knock, which meant it was close enough to catch. Cole signaled change on the cannery feed. Grace met my eyes, and I understood we were past hiding. The net was tightening and the next phase would be consequences. 6 months later, the estate smelled like cut grass instead of smoke. Spring had pushed through the hard winter we carried home from the woods. Lily rode her scooter in tight circles on the drive, laughing, then stopping to check the gate twice before she trusted the air again. Atlas lay in the sun with his scar hidden under new fur, one ear always angled toward the trees. Inside, Mrs. Whitaker's kitchen sounded normal again. A kettle, a timer, a child asking for more toast. Normal but earned, like a bandage you change every day, and it still stung sometimes. Behind that quiet, the cannery operation kept echoing. Damon's surveillance, Grace's receipts, and the files we grabbed with shaking hands became a chain of custody instead of a rumor. Federal agents arrived without sirens because Damon insisted noise was for people who wanted applause. They took copies, logged timestamps, and treated Grace like the witness she always was. The first arrests did not feel like victory. They felt like proof that evil had paperwork. 2 social workers were charged. A judge resigned. A private attorney lost his license and his freedom, and the news finally believed us all for once. The cost came in thinner ways. Protective orders stacked on Damon's desk like bricks. Grace slept with her phone face down, and a go-bag by the door even here. Cole rotated guards until their eyes looked sanded raw because the network did not vanish when headlines moved on. My own sleep stayed light. I woke to a distant car door and counted children in my head before I could breathe. Lily started therapy with a woman who never rushed her, and Eli learned to ask before touching a doorknob. Healing meant routines, not miracles, and we practiced them every morning. Mornings became a choreography. Mrs. Whitaker made oatmeal, and Damon's chef learned how to cut fruit into silly shapes without turning it into a performance. Lily did homework at the big dining table, then asked to sit where she could see the front door, and nobody corrected her. Mason paced at first, unable to let his back meet a chair until Atlas pressed his weight against Mason's shin and stayed there. Eli collected toy cars and lined them up by color, a quiet way of proving order still existed. We called the safety drills practice walks, so fear stayed manageable. The legal part was the slowest kind of fight. Grace became the boys' temporary guardian through the court, because she already had the educational records and the credibility Damon's name could not buy. Damon funded lawyers who spoke in calm sentences and carried binders thicker than my arm. They filed for emergency placement, then for extended placement, then for a long-term plan that kept the brothers together. The paperwork respected the system enough to force it to face itself. Mason and Eli stayed in the East Wing, but the signatures lived on courthouse paper, not on Damon's promise alone. The old river cannery did not survive the investigation. County crews arrived one morning with fencing and machines that groaned like tired animals. I watched from the hill with Grace and felt my throat tighten as walls came down. It was not closure, but it was a statement. The place where children had been turned into numbers became rubble hauled away in trucks, replaced by dirt and grass seed. Damon stood beside me, hands in his coat pockets, saying nothing, but I sensed relief under the silence. Sometimes you have to erase a doorway to stop people walking through it. My own name stopped tasting like blame. After the investigations opened, the staff who had whispered about me started apologizing in awkward fragments. Damon's lawyers helped clear the record that I had been scapegoated, but the real repair happened in smaller moments. Parents from the gala sending messages to say they were wrong, my manager offering my position back with steadier respect, and me realizing I could either run from this forever or step closer. I stayed. I took training hours with a nonprofit Grace trusted. I learned how to file reports without getting swallowed by the system's maze again. Damon did not become softer in a storybook way. He became clearer. I saw him choose restraint when anger would have been easier, and I saw him choose mercy in places I once assumed only cruelty lived. That did not erase the shadow around him. It just made the shadow feel directed, like a guard dog instead of a storm. Our bond grew in scenes like sitting in the hallway outside Lily's room, until her breathing slowed, or sharing coffee at dawn while Cole's monitors glowed. He never asked for gratitude. That made it impossible to hide mine from him. I still did not call it love. I was a single mom who had survived smaller betrayals long before the cannery, and I knew how quickly safety can become a chain. Some nights Damon's world brushed the edges of ours. A whispered report, a visitor turned away, a reminder that his power came from places I did not want Noah to inherit. And yet, when he walked into the kitchen and checked Lily's backpack for an inhaler, I felt my chest loosen. Attraction was not fireworks. It was gravity. We kept distance, but the space between us filled with trust. Grace returned to teaching in a small program Damon funded off the main house, a place with extra locks that did not feel like a prison. She brought Mason's humor back by handing him responsibility in doses he could handle. Lily started drawing again, always adding a dog in the corner like a signature. Eli learned to sleep through the night if Atlas's bed stayed near the door. Noah made friends with both boys the way children do, unbothered by paperwork. At dinner, Damon let the kids claim the middle, and that felt like surrender, the kind you choose daily. I used to believe family was blood, staying quiet so life would not notice you. Now I know it can be a decision you repeat, even when fear tries to write the ending for you. We did not win by being fearless. We won by being stubborn about care. The files still sit in a locked cabinet in Damon's study, and I still flinch when a number calls. But I also watch Lily braid Eli's hair while Mason pretends not to smile, and I feel something rebuild in me. Power means nothing unless it becomes shelter. And shelter is work. Morning light comes in through the kitchen windows, and for once it doesn't feel like a spotlight. Mrs. Whitaker sets out bowls. Atlas curls at the children's feet, and the whole room smells like toast and oranges. Lily slides her homework folder across the table with the serious pride of a kid who fought hard to be normal again. Mason taps Eli's shoulder to remind him to chew, not bolt. And Noah leans in close like these boys have always been his cousins. I watch Damon at the counter, sleeves rolled, quiet as breath, and I let myself exhale today. Damon paid first, and he paid loudest, even when he acted like it was nothing. He led investigators into rooms men like him usually keep sealed. He signed statements that made old allies turn their backs, and he accepted headlines that tried to paint him as either savior or monster, like there was no in-between. He burned bridges he once called necessary, because Lily's safety mattered more than his reputation for control. The risk didn't end with court dates. It lived in every tightened security measure, every lawyer call, every night he stayed awake so the kids could sleep too. I paid in quieter currency. I paid in pride, because I had to admit I couldn't protect my son by staying invisible. I paid in certainty, because once you see children treated like entries on a list, you can't go back to believing the world is basically fine. I paid by letting people see how afraid I was, even when I wanted to pretend I was made of steel. The hardest payment was choosing not to live small anymore. Filing reports, showing up to hearings, answering questions, and refusing to shrink when someone tried to blame me again this time. Grace paid in peace and anonymity. She used to be just a teacher with a tired smile and a stack of essays. Now she's a name on threat assessments and a person who checks mirrors before unlocking her car. She traded quiet evenings for emergency plans, and she did it anyway. Mason paid in childhood. He still laughs, but he does it like he's checking if it's allowed. Some days he carries Eli's backpack without being asked, and I can see the weight of being 8 and feeling responsible for a whole world. We don't pretend that's fair for him. The promise that holds us isn't a speech. It's what happens on ordinary mornings when we practice safety without turning it into fear. It's Grace meeting with caseworkers in daylight, paperwork neat, every detail documented, so the system can't twist the story again. It's Damon funding therapists and lawyers and still asking for second opinions, because power alone isn't proof. It's me keeping Noah's bedtime steady, even when my phone buzzes with updates I don't want him to hear. It's Lily learning that locked doors can mean protection, not punishment, and Eli learning he can say no and be believed. I used to think kindness was something you offered when life was safe, like dessert after dinner. Now I know kindness is what you bring into danger with your hands shaking, because it's the only thing that reminds a child they're not alone. But kindness without courage becomes a wish. Courage without boundaries becomes chaos. What we built here is both. Warm soup and hard rules, bedtime stories and security cameras, open hearts and locked gates. The lesson is simple. Power means nothing unless it shelters the vulnerable. If it only protects ego, it becomes predatory and leaves victims everywhere. Damon remains dangerous, and I don't romanticize that. I've watched him walk into a room of professionals and make them straighten their spines without raising his voice. I've also watched him kneel to tie Eli's shoe because Eli's hands were trembling. That contrast is where my feelings live, complicated and honest. I don't owe him my heart, and he has never asked for it. What he has asked for is my clarity, my refusal to look away, and my willingness to tell the truth even when it shakes the walls. In return, he offers shelter that doesn't demand my silence. Sometimes I think about the night of the gala, strangers' eyes turning me into a villain because it was easier than admitting a child could vanish in plain sight. I carry that memory like a bruise that taught me where my boundaries are. I am not the woman who apologizes for existing anymore. I am the woman who walks a kid to the bathroom at a party, checks the locks, and asks hard questions. I'm still tender. I still get scared. But now I know tenderness is not weakness when it's paired with action. It can start a rescue today. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt small in the face of something bigger than you, remember what I learned the hard way. Staying quiet doesn't keep you safe. It just keeps you unseen. Pay attention. Trust your instincts. Protect the people who can't protect themselves yet, even if it costs you comfort. And if you stayed with me through this story, tell me where you're watching from and what moment hit you the hardest. Did it change how you think about power, family, or kindness? If it did, like the video, share it, and subscribe so others can hear it too.